The dust settled on the westbound stagecoach as it rolled into Fort Kearny, Nebraska, carrying a passenger who would never let anyone touch her, not even to help her down from the high step. Rebecca Zimmerman descended carefully, gripping the doorframe with white knuckles, her dark auburn hair pinned severely beneath a plain bonnet, her gray traveling dress buttoned to her throat despite the August heat of 1878. She refused the driver's offered hand, and when her boot caught on her hem and she stumbled, she righted herself alone, brushing imaginary dust from her skirts with trembling fingers that betrayed more than simple travel fatigue. The town sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings bleached pale by the prairie sun, their false fronts promising more grandeur than the simple structures behind them delivered. Fort Kearny had grown beyond its military origins, becoming a waypoint for wagon trains and settlers pushing westward, though the fort itself still stood at the town's edge, a reminder of the conflicts that had shaped this land. Rebecca carried only a single carpet bag and a leather satchel, everything she owned in the world fitting into two modest containers. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks ago, fleeing memories that stalked her dreams and made her skin crawl whenever another person came too near. The telegram she clutched had been brief. Her Aunt Martha needed help at the general store, and Rebecca needed somewhere to disappear. The arrangement suited them both, though her aunt did not know the full truth of why her niece had answered so quickly, why she had boarded the first available stage and traveled across half the country to a town she had never seen. "Miss Zimmerman." A woman's voice called from the boardwalk, and Rebecca turned to see a plump woman in her 50s, gray hair escaping from beneath a faded calico bonnet, waving enthusiastically. Aunt Martha looked older than Rebecca remembered from her childhood visit to St. Louis 15 years ago, but her smile remained warm and welcoming. Rebecca crossed the dusty street, careful to maintain distance even as she greeted her aunt. "Thank you for allowing me to come." "Allowing? Child, you're saving me. My back is not what it was, and keeping inventory is becoming impossible." Martha's sharp eyes took in Rebecca's pale face, the shadows beneath her eyes, the way she held herself as though expecting a blow. But she asked no questions, only gestured toward the main street. "The store is just there, and we have rooms above. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough." They walked through the afternoon heat, and Rebecca observed the town with growing relief. Fort Kearny was small enough that she might blend into its rhythms, large enough that she would not be the constant subject of gossip. Cowboys and ranch hands moved through the streets, and she tensed automatically, but none paid her particular attention. Settlers' wives carried baskets and called greetings to each other. A dog slept in the shade of the livery stable. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, safe. The general store stood 2 stories tall, its painted sign reading Morrison's General Goods in proud letters. Martha had married William Morrison 30 years ago, and together they had built this business from nothing. William had died 2 winters past, Martha explained as they entered the dim interior, leaving her alone to manage everything. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, tobacco, leather, and the indefinable scent of dry goods. Shelves lined every wall, packed with everything from flour sacks to bolts of fabric, from hammers to hair ribbons. A large counter dominated the center, with the cash register sitting like a brass throne. Rebecca felt something ease in her chest. Here was work purpose, a routine that might silence the constant whisper of panic in her mind. "Your room is at the back, upstairs," Martha said, leading the way through a door behind the counter. "Mine faces the street. We share the kitchen and sitting room. There is a bathing room, which is a luxury most places here do not have, but William insisted on putting in a real tub." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a star-pattern quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a wardrobe that seemed far too large for Rebecca's meager possessions. A single window looked out over the back lots, where chickens scratched in yards and laundry flapped on lines. "It's perfect," Rebecca said, and meant it. This plain room in this plain town might be the refuge she desperately needed. She unpacked quickly, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her hairbrush and pins on the washstand. The photograph in its silver frame she placed on the small table beside the bed, face down. She could not bear to look at it, but neither could she leave it behind. That evening, Martha showed her the store's inventory system, explaining which items moved quickly and which gathered dust, which customers paid promptly and which needed gentle reminding. Rebecca absorbed it all, grateful for the distraction, for something to think about beyond her own fractured nerves. "We open at 7, Martha said. "Most of the ranch hands and cowboys come in early before riding out. They are good men mostly, though rough around the edges. Some of the settlers' wives are particular about their dealings, wanting to examine every bolt of cloth and complaining about prices, but that is normal enough. You will learn their ways quickly." Rebecca nodded, then ventured the question she had been holding back. "Will I need to measure fabric or fit clothes? I can do accounts and inventory, but if measuring requires..." She trailed off, unable to explain why the thought of standing close enough to measure someone's shoulders or waist made her stomach clench. Martha studied her with those sharp eyes. "I can handle the fitting work for now. You focus on the counter, the stocking, the books. We will work around any difficulties." The understanding in her aunt's voice nearly undid Rebecca's careful composure. She blinked rapidly and turned away, pretending to examine a shelf of canned goods. "Thank you." That night, in her narrow bed, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of Fort Kearny settling into darkness. Somewhere, a piano played badly. Horses moved in the livery stable. Men's voices carried from the saloon 3 buildings down. She thought of St. Louis, of the room she had fled, of hands that should have protected her but had instead taught her to fear any human contact. Her brother, 6 years older and twisted by something dark inside him, had made her childhood a nightmare and her young womanhood unbearable. When he died in a factory accident 3 months ago, she had expected relief, but instead the fear had grown worse, as though his ghost haunted her skin. She had been 18 for only 4 months. Some days she felt ancient. Morning came with Martha's knock on the door and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Rebecca dressed quickly in a plain brown work dress, braided her hair into a coronet, and went down to help prepare for the day. The routine soothed her, sweeping the floors, arranging displays, filling the candy jars. When Martha unlocked the front door at 7 precisely, Rebecca stood behind the counter, ready. The first customers were a pair of settler women who wanted ribbon and thread. They chatted with Martha while Rebecca measured the ribbon against the brass ruler fixed to the counter's edge, careful not to let her fingers brush theirs when making the exchange. Next came an old-timer who needed tobacco and cartridges, paying in coins he counted out slowly, his gnarled hands shaking with age. Rebecca waited patiently, accepting the money without comment. Then the cowboys started arriving, and Rebecca's carefully maintained calm began to fracture. They were not bad men, as Martha had said. They were simply big, loud, confident in ways that made Rebecca want to flee to the back room. They stomped in with their spurs jingling, smelling of horses and sweat, talking too loudly, standing too close to the counter. Most were polite enough, calling her Miss and Madam. but their sheer physical presence overwhelmed her. One reached across the counter to point at the jar of peppermints, and Rebecca flinched so violently she knocked over a display of sewing needles. The cowboy, a young man with a sunburned face and friendly eyes, looked startled and apologetic. "Sorry, miss, did not mean to spook you." "No, I am sorry, I just—" Rebecca bent to retrieve the scattered needles, grateful for an excuse to break eye contact. Her hands shook as she gathered them. Martha intervened smoothly, helping with the needles and chatting with the cowboy about the weather and cattle prices until he paid for his peppermints and left. When the door closed behind him, Martha turned to Rebecca with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I am sorry. I will do better." "You have nothing to apologize for, but if you need a moment, take it." Rebecca made it through the morning by force of will alone, but by afternoon, her nerves were stretched thin as telegraph wire. Every time the door opened, she tensed. Every time a customer approached the counter, she had to consciously prevent herself from backing away. She felt ridiculous, damaged, broken in ways she could not explain even to her kind aunt. It was nearly closing time when the door opened one more time, and a man walked in who was different from the others. He was tall, as most cowboys were, but moved with a deliberate care that suggested he was aware of the space he occupied and the effect his presence might have. His clothes were typical ranch gear, well worn but clean, and his hat was pushed back to reveal dark brown hair and eyes that scanned the store with quiet intelligence. What struck Rebecca most was the gentleness in his weathered face, the soft way he closed the door behind him, the careful distance he maintained from the other customer finishing a purchase at the counter. "Afternoon, Zachary," Martha called out cheerfully. "Need your usual supplies?" "Yes, madam, if it is not too much trouble." His voice was low, almost soft, matching his careful movements. "Also need some of that liniment for horses if you still carry it. My best mare has been favoring her left foreleg. We have it." "Rebecca, can you help Mr. Prescott while I finish with Mrs. Henderson?" Rebecca swallowed her automatic refusal and nodded. The man, Zachary Prescott, approached the counter but stopped a respectful 3 feet away, not crowding forward like many of the others had. "What else did you need, sir?" Rebecca managed, keeping her eyes on the ledger book in front of her. 2 pounds of coffee, a sack of flour, some dried beans and ammunition if you have the right kind. I have the specifications here." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and set it on the counter rather than handing it to her, then stepped back again. Rebecca picked up the paper, careful not to look at him directly and read the ammunition requirements. "We have this. I will gather your items." She moved through the store, collecting what he needed, hyper-aware of his presence even though he stood perfectly still, not following her or attempting conversation. When she returned with the goods, he helped her load them into a wooden crate he had brought with him, but he did the lifting himself, never expecting her to assist or reaching toward her. "What do I owe you?" he asked when everything was packed. Rebecca calculated quickly, writing the total on a slip of paper. He paid exact change, thanked her quietly, lifted his crate and left without fuss or fanfare. When the door closed behind him, Rebecca realized she had been holding her breath. Martha, finished with Mrs. Henderson, looked at her with a knowing expression. "Zachary Prescott is one of the good ones," Martha said. "Has a small ranch about 5 miles east of town. Keeps to himself mostly, though he is friendly enough when drawn into conversation. Been here about 3 years now, came from somewhere back east originally. Dependable, honest, always pays his bills on time." Rebecca nodded, filing the information away as irrelevant. She had no intention of forming opinions about any of the customers, good or otherwise. She was here to work, to hide, to hopefully heal enough that she could function in the world again. Romance, friendship, connection of any kind, those were for people who were not broken the way she was. But over the following weeks, as summer faded toward autumn, Rebecca found herself noticing Zachary Prescott in ways she had not anticipated. He came to the store every 2 weeks, like clockwork, always in the late afternoon when the crowds had thinned. He never rushed, never crowded, never made her feel trapped or threatened. He was polite to everyone but seemed to possess an almost uncanny awareness of boundaries, physical and otherwise. Where other men might lean on the counter or stand too close while Martha measured fabric, Zachary always maintained distance. Where others might try to help Rebecca lift heavy items without asking, Zachary would simply ask if she wanted assistance and accept her refusal without offense. She began to look forward to his visits in a way that confused and frightened her. She told herself it was simply because he was one of the few customers who did not make her want to flee, but she knew it was more than that. There was something about him, a quietness, a kindness, that called to something deep inside her. One afternoon in September, when golden light slanted through the store windows and the air held the first hint of autumn coolness, Zachary arrived to find Rebecca struggling with a shipment of canned goods. The crates were heavy, and she was trying to move them from the storeroom to the front displays without asking Martha, whose back had been particularly painful that week. "Would you like help?" Zachary's voice came from behind her, and Rebecca startled, nearly dropping the crate she was carrying. "I can manage," she said automatically, though her arms were shaking with the weight. "I am sure you can. But would you like help anyway?" Something about the way he phrased it, acknowledging her capability while still offering assistance, made Rebecca pause. She set down the crate with a thud and turned to face him, really look at him for the first time. His dark brown eyes were patient, kind, completely devoid of any demand or expectation. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you." He moved past her into the storeroom, careful not to brush against her even in the narrow doorway, and began carrying out crates as though they weighed nothing. He placed them where she directed, then returned for more without waiting for thanks or praise. Within 10 minutes, all the crates were moved, and Zachary was back at his respectful distance, waiting for Martha to help with his own purchases. "That was kind of you," Rebecca said before she could stop herself. He looked at her with surprise, as though kindness was so ordinary it did not warrant comment. It was nothing. But it was not nothing to Rebecca. That small interaction, conducted entirely on her terms with her space and her boundaries respected, felt like water in a desert. She caught herself watching him as Martha filled his order, noticing details she had trained herself not to see in other men. The crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. The calluses on his hands that spoke of hard, honest work. The way he thanked Martha for every item, every kindness, as though courtesy cost nothing and therefore should be freely given, when he left, Rebecca felt an unfamiliar pang. She wanted him to come back, which terrified her. That night, as she helped Martha prepare dinner, her aunt said casually, "Zachary asked about you." Rebecca's knife paused mid-slice through a carrot. "What did he ask? Whether you were settling in all right, whether the work was too hard, whether you seemed happy." Martha smiled at the pot she was stirring. "I told him you were managing well, that you were a hard worker and that you kept your thoughts to yourself. He seemed satisfied with that. Why would he ask about me? Because he is a thoughtful man and he noticed you moved his crates. Because he likes to know that people around him are well." Martha glanced at Rebecca. "And perhaps because he finds you interesting." "No." Rebecca's response was immediate and sharp. "No, Aunt Martha, I cannot, I am not. You must not encourage anything. Martha held up her hands. I am not encouraging anything, child. I am only telling you what he asked. What you do with that information is entirely your choice. But the information burrowed into Rebecca's mind and would not leave. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she thought about Zachary Prescott and felt a confused tangle of longing and terror. She wanted connection, yearned for it with an ache that never quite faded, but the thought of allowing anyone close enough to possibly hurt her made panic rise in her throat like bile. October arrived with cold winds and the first frost. The store grew busy as ranchers and settlers prepared for winter, stocking up on supplies that might be hard to get once the snows came. Rebecca worked long hours, and the busyness helped keep her darker thoughts at bay. She was learning the rhythms of the town, the personalities of the regular customers, the routines that gave each day structure. Zachary came in on a Thursday afternoon, later than usual, looking tired and worried. Martha was out making a delivery to a homestead family, leaving Rebecca alone in the store. When the door opened and she saw him, Rebecca felt that now familiar flutter of confused emotion. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Afternoon, Miss Zimmerman." He approached the counter but seemed even more careful than usual about distance. "I am sorry to ask, but do you have any medical supplies? Bandages, antiseptic, laudanum if you carry it. Are you injured?" The question escaped before Rebecca could consider whether she wanted to know. "Not me. I found a boy on my property. Cannot be more than 14. Looks like he ran away from somewhere. He has a bad cut on his leg, infected. I cleaned it best I could and brought him to town to see the doctor, but Doc Williams is out at the Morrison Ranch delivering a baby. I need to get the boy settled and cared for until the doctor returns." Rebecca gathered the supplies quickly, adding extras she thought might be useful. "Where is he now?" "In my wagon outside. I did not want to leave him alone, but I did not want to carry him in either, in case it hurt him worse." She found herself moving toward the door before conscious thought caught up with action. "Let me see." They went outside together, and Rebecca saw a young boy huddled in the back of Zachary's wagon, pale and shaking, his leg wrapped in what looked like a torn shirt soaked through with blood. Her fear of touch warred with something stronger, a compassion she had thought her brother's cruelty had beaten out of her. "What is your name?" she asked the boy gently. "Thomas," he whispered. "Am I going to die? Not if we can help it." Rebecca looked at Zachary. "Can you carry him up to the rooms above the store? We have a spare bed and I can tend him until the doctor comes." "Are you sure?" Zachary's eyes searched her face. "I can take him to the boarding house. They will not care for him properly. Bring him up." Zachary lifted the boy as though he weighed nothing, cradling him with the same careful gentleness he brought to everything. Rebecca led the way through the store and up the stairs, directing him to the small spare room that Martha sometimes used for storage. Together, they cleared a space and made up the bed with clean linens. "I need to examine the wound," Rebecca said, surprised by her own calm. "Thomas, this may hurt, but I will be as gentle as I can." The boy nodded, tears streaming down his dirty face. Rebecca unwrapped the makeshift bandage and bit back a gasp at what she saw. The cut was deep and clearly infected, red lines of poison spreading from the wound. She had seen infections before, had helped nurse neighbors in St. Louis through fevers and injuries. Her hands moved with remembered competence, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that made Thomas cry out, applying salve, wrapping it with clean bandages. Zachary stood by, handing her supplies when she needed them, his presence solid and steadying without being intrusive. When she had done all she could, she sat back and looked at the boy's flushed, feverish face. "He needs the doctor," she said quietly. "I will ride out to the Morrison place and bring Doc Williams back, even if I have to drag him away from the delivery." Zachary's voice was grim with determination. "Will you stay with him?" "Yes." Their eyes met and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then Zachary was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs, and Rebecca was alone with the boy, doing something she had thought impossible, caring for another human being despite her fear. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering about someone named Mr. Jenkins who had beaten him, about running away from an apprenticeship that was more slavery than education. Rebecca bathed his face with cool water, checked his bandages, murmured soothing words she did not know she remembered. When Martha returned and found them, she immediately took charge, brewing willow bark tea for the fever and making broth to coax into the boy when he was conscious enough to swallow. Zachary returned 3 hours later with Doc Williams, a gruff older man with whiskey on his breath but steady hands and sharp eyes. He examined Thomas, nodded approval at Rebecca's care, and gave laudanum for the pain. "He will likely live, thanks to quick action," Doc Williams said, packing up his bag. "Keep the wound clean, watch for more signs of infection, feed him when he will eat. I will check back tomorrow." After the doctor left, Zachary stood in the doorway of the spare room watching Rebecca adjust Thomas's blankets. "You were very capable," he said softly. "Thank you for helping him. You found him. You brought him to safety. I only did what anyone would do." "No," Zachary's voice was firm. "Not anyone would do what you did. Not everyone has that kind of courage or compassion." Rebecca felt heat rise to her face and turned away from his two seeing eyes. "You should go. It is getting late and you have a long ride back to your ranch. Will you be all right?" "I can stay, help watch over him." The offer tempted her more than was safe. "We will be fine. Aunt Martha and I can manage." He lingered a moment longer, then nodded and left. Rebecca listened to his footsteps fade away and felt an ache she had no name for. Thomas improved slowly over the following week. The fever broke on the 3rd day, and the infection began to recede under Doc Williams's care and Rebecca's constant attention. The boy was pathetically grateful, thanking her every time she brought him food or changed his bandages. He told his story in fragments, about parents dead from cholera, about being indentured to a saddle maker who worked him 16 hours a day and beat him for the smallest mistakes, about finally running away and trying to make it to Denver, where he had heard there was work for willing hands. "You are safe now," Rebecca told him. "We will figure out what to do next when you are healed." Zachary came by every day, bringing small gifts for Thomas, a book, a whittled wooden horse, a bag of candy. He always asked Rebecca how she was managing, whether she needed anything, and he never once pushed past her carefully maintained boundaries. His thoughtfulness made her heart hurt in ways both painful and sweet. One evening, as Rebecca sat by Thomas's bed while he slept, Zachary found her there. Martha had sent him up, saying Rebecca had been sitting too long and needed to be reminded to rest. He stopped in the doorway, respecting the threshold. "He is doing well," Rebecca said softly, not looking away from the sleeping boy. "Doc Williams says he can probably move around a bit tomorrow." "And you, how are you doing?" The question surprised her into meeting his eyes. "I am fine." "Are you?" He stepped just inside the room but came no closer. "You have been caring for him day and night. Martha says you barely sleep." "I cannot sleep well anyway," Rebecca admitted, then wondered why she had told him that. Zachary was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I notice things, Miss Zimmerman. I notice that you never let anyone touch you, not even in passing. I notice that you flinch when men stand too close. I notice that you carry yourself like someone expecting an attack." Rebecca's hands clenched in her lap. "You should not notice such things. They are not your concern. maybe not, but I notice them anyway." He paused. "I also notice that you are one of the kindest, strongest people I have met. The way you cared for Thomas despite your own difficulties, that took real courage or stupidity," Rebecca said bitterly. "Getting involved, caring about what happens to people, it only leads to pain." "Sometimes," Zachary agreed, "but not always. Sometimes it leads to healing. For him and maybe for you too." She wanted to argue, to push him away with sharp words, but she was too tired and his voice was too gentle. Instead, she said, "Why do you care?" "Because you matter. Because I see you trying so hard every day, and I want you to know that someone notices, someone appreciates it." He shifted his weight. "And because I think, given time and patience, we could be friends, if you would like that." "I do not know how to be friends with anyone anymore," Rebecca whispered. "I do not know how to let anyone close. Then we will figure it out together as slowly as you need." Zachary's smile was visible even in the dim lamplight. "I am a patient man, Miss Zimmerman. I have waited 3 years to build my ranch into something worth having. I can wait as long as it takes for you to feel safe." Something cracked in Rebecca's chest, a fissure in the walls she had built so carefully. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I do not know what happened to make me like this." "Yes, you do," he said gently. "And someday, when you are ready, maybe you will tell me. But until then, just know that I see you, Rebecca Zimmerman, and what I see is someone worth knowing." He left then, quietly, and Rebecca sat in the darkness, feeling that crack in her walls widen just a little, letting in a thin shaft of light. Thomas recovered enough to move around within 2 weeks, though Doc Williams insisted he not try to walk on the injured leg for at least another month. The boy made himself useful in small ways, helping Martha with inventory, talking to customers, becoming a fixture in the store. Rebecca found his presence oddly comforting, perhaps because he was young enough not to threaten her, or perhaps because caring for him had awakened something she thought dead inside her. Zachary's visits became more frequent, though he was careful never to make his interest in Rebecca too obvious. He would stop by for supplies, yes, but he would also just come to talk, to share stories about his ranch, to ask Rebecca's opinion on books he was reading or news from the newspaper. He treated her like a person whose thoughts mattered, whose words had value, and slowly, Rebecca began to believe it might be true. One afternoon in late October, when the store was quiet and Thomas was napping upstairs, Zachary said, "I am riding out to check my fence lines tomorrow. It is a beautiful ride this time of year with all the colors. Would you like to come?" Rebecca's immediate instinct was to refuse, but something made her hesitate. "I do not ride well. I have a gentle mare, calm as a rocking chair, and we would not have to ride fast or far. Just out to see the land, breathe some air that does not smell like dry goods and leather." She wanted to say yes with a fierceness that startled her. "I would need to ask Aunt Martha if she can spare me." "Ask her," Zachary encouraged. "I think she would be glad to see you take some time for yourself." Martha not only agreed but insisted, practically shooing Rebecca upstairs to find something suitable to wear for riding. Rebecca owned nothing appropriate, but Martha loaned her a split riding skirt and a warm jacket. That night, Rebecca barely slept, torn between anticipation and terror about what she had agreed to. Zachary arrived at 8 the next morning with 2 horses, exactly as promised. The mare was a pretty chestnut with a white blaze and kind eyes. Zachary showed Rebecca how to mount, talking her through each step without ever touching her, patient when she struggled with the unfamiliar movements. "Her name is Rosie," he said, as Rebecca settled gingerly into the saddle. "She belonged to my mother back in Pennsylvania. When I came west, I could not bear to leave her behind." They rode out of Fort Kearny slowly, heading east toward Zachary's ranch. The Nebraska prairie stretched in every direction, grass turning gold under the autumn sun, the sky so blue and vast it made Rebecca's eyes ache. She had spent weeks inside the dim store, and the openness felt overwhelming and glorious in equal measure. Zachary talked as they rode, filling the silence with stories about his life. He had grown up outside Philadelphia, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had been comfortable, not wealthy but secure, until his father's business partner had embezzled everything and disappeared. The scandal had destroyed them financially and socially. Zachary's mother had died from the strain of it, and his father had drunk himself to death within a year. The brothers had scattered, seeking new starts in different directions. "I came west because I wanted space," Zachary explained. "Wanted to build something that was mine that no one could take away through lies or betrayal. The ranch is small, but it is honest work, clean work." "Do you regret leaving?" Rebecca asked. "Sometimes I miss my brothers, though we were never particularly close, but I do not regret the leaving itself. Some places hold too many ghosts." He glanced at her. "I imagine you understand that." "Yes," Rebecca said quietly. "I understand exactly that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Rebecca marveled at how easy it felt, being near him without fear churning in her stomach. Perhaps it was the horses between them, providing natural distance. Or perhaps it was simply Zachary himself, the way he never pushed, never demanded, never expected anything she was not ready to give. His ranch appeared over a low rise, a neat collection of buildings including a house, barn, and several outbuildings. The house was small but well built, with a wide porch and windows that would catch the morning sun. Corrals held horses and a few cattle. Everything looked orderly, cared for, loved. "It is not much," Zachary said, almost apologetically, "but it suits me." "It is beautiful," Rebecca said, and meant it. The ranch felt peaceful, a place carved out of the wild land through hard work and persistence. She could imagine winter here, snow covering the prairie, smoke rising from the chimney, the world reduced to this small circle of warmth and safety. They dismounted, and Zachary showed her around, introducing her to his animals, explaining his plans for expansion. He was building slowly, carefully, not taking on debt, doing most of the work himself. His pride in what he had accomplished was evident and endearing. "Would you like to see inside?" he asked, gesturing to the house. "I promise it is reasonably clean. I had a sense you might say yes to coming today, so I tidied." Rebecca felt her lips curve in what might have been her first genuine smile in months. "You tidied in the hope I would visit. I am an optimistic man." He led the way to the porch. "Also, my regular standards of housekeeping are somewhat lacking, so any excuse to improve them is appreciated." The inside of the house was indeed tidy, consisting of a main room with a kitchen area at one end, and a sitting area with a fireplace at the other, plus 2 smaller rooms that served as bedroom and storage. The furnishings were simple but comfortable, and books were everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on the table, lying open beside the armchair near the fireplace. "You read a lot," Rebecca observed. "It is how I survived the winters back east and how I survive them here. The isolation does not bother me as long as I have books." He picked up a volume from the table. "Do you read?" "I used to love it. I have not been able to concentrate well lately." She touched the spine of the book nearest her, some novel by Dickens. "My mind wanders." "Maybe you just need the right story, something engaging enough to hold your attention despite everything else." He set down the book he was holding. "You are welcome to borrow any of these, as many as you like." They talked about books and discovered shared favorites, debating the merits of different authors while Zachary made coffee on his cookstove. It felt surreal, standing in this man's house, conversing like normal people, without the constant thrum of anxiety that usually plagued Rebecca. She found herself relaxing in increments, her shoulders loosening, her breathing deepening. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could contain it. Zachary looked at her seriously. "Because you deserve kindness, because I enjoy your company. Because I think you are remarkable and I want to know you better." He paused. "And because I see someone who has been hurt and I think maybe I can help, even if that help is just being patient and present. You do not know what happened to me. No. And you do not have to tell me unless you want to." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one on the table near her, not handing it directly. "Whatever it was, it does not change that you deserve to be treated with respect and care." Rebecca picked up the coffee, warming her hands on the cup. "My brother," she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and painful. "For years he hurt me. I do not mean just hitting, though there was that too. I mean, he touched me in ways. He made me feel like I was dirty, broken, like my body was not my own." She could not look at Zachary, could not bear to see pity or disgust in his eyes. "He died 3 months ago and I thought I would feel free. But instead, I just feel more afraid. As though without him, I have no idea who I am or how to exist in the world." The silence stretched, and Rebecca braced herself for rejection, for the inevitable withdrawal that would come now that he knew how damaged she was. But when Zachary spoke, his voice was steady and filled with quiet fury. "I am sorry that happened to you. I am sorry that someone who should have protected you instead hurt you so badly. And I am glad he is dead, because if he was not, I might be tempted to kill him myself." Rebecca's head snapped up, and she saw the anger in Zachary's face, but it was not directed at her. It was for her on her behalf, a righteous rage that somehow made her feel less alone. "You do not think I am ruined," she whispered. "Ruined?" Zachary looked genuinely shocked. "Rebecca, you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. What you survived, what you are still surviving every day, that takes incredible strength. You are not ruined. You are healing, and healing is hard, brutal work. But you are doing it." The tears came then, unstoppable, and Rebecca collapsed into the nearest chair, covering her face with her hands. She wept for the girl she had been, for the years stolen from her, for the fear that still controlled so much of her life. She wept because someone finally understood, finally saw her pain and did not turn away. Zachary did not try to touch her or comfort her physically. He simply pulled up a chair several feet away and sat with her, his presence solid and steady, until the storm of emotion passed. When she finally raised her head, he handed her a clean handkerchief, setting it on the table between them rather than directly in her hand. "Thank you," she managed, wiping her face. "You do not have to thank me for basic decency. But I do, because it feels anything but basic to me." They sat together in the quiet house, drinking their cooling coffee, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her. She had told another person her darkest secret, and the world had not ended. Zachary had not rejected her or looked at her with disgust. He had simply accepted her truth and remained beside her. It was such a small thing and such an enormous thing all at once. The ride back to Fort Kearny was quieter, but it was a comfortable quiet, the silence of people who had moved past small talk into something deeper. When they reached the store, Zachary helped her dismount by giving verbal instructions, never reaching to assist unless she asked. "Thank you for today," Rebecca said, "for showing me your ranch, for listening, for everything. Thank you for trusting me enough to come to tell me what you did." Zachary gathered Rosie's reins. "I meant what I said. I will wait, for however long it takes for you to feel safe. And if that means we only ever have this, conversations and carefully maintained distance, then I will be grateful for that." But if someday you want more, if you want to try to let someone closer, I will be here." He rode away before Rebecca could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the dusty street, her heart pounding with a feeling that might have been hope. Winter arrived in earnest in November, bringing cold winds and light snows that would deepen as the season progressed. The store's business slowed as ranchers and settlers hunkered down, venturing to town only when necessary. Thomas's leg healed completely, and he and Martha struck a deal that he would work in the store in exchange for room and board. The arrangement suited everyone, giving Thomas a home and Martha an extra set of young, strong hands. Rebecca found herself thinking about Zachary constantly, replaying their conversations, remembering the way he looked at her with such patient kindness. She caught herself watching for him during his regular visits, her heart lifting foolishly when he walked through the door. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. December brought heavier snows and longer nights. One evening, as Rebecca helped Martha prepare dinner, her aunt said casually, "Zachary asked if we would like to join him for Christmas dinner at his ranch." Rebecca's knife stilled. "What did you tell him that I would ask you?" Martha glanced at her. "He said he would understand if you preferred not to come, but that he would enjoy the company if we did. He is planning to invite Thomas as well, give the boy a proper holiday meal." The idea of spending Christmas at Zachary's ranch sent Rebecca's emotions into chaos. She wanted to go desperately, but the thought of being in that intimate space, of perhaps being expected to act like a couple when she was not even sure she could handle a touch on the shoulder, made panic claw at her throat. "I do not know," she admitted. "What if he expects something I cannot give? Has Zachary ever expected anything from you?" Martha asked gently. "Or has he only ever been patient and respectful?" Rebecca knew the answer. Zachary had never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel obligated. "You think I should go?" "I think you should do what feels right to you. But I also think Zachary is a good man, and good men are rare enough that we should not turn them away out of fear alone." Rebecca thought about it for 3 days, weighing her fear against her longing. Finally, she told Martha yes, they could accept the invitation, and then spent the remaining weeks until Christmas in a state of nervous anticipation. Christmas dawned clear and bitterly cold, the prairie blanketed in fresh snow that glittered under weak winter sun. Zachary arrived mid-morning with a sleigh borrowed from a neighbor, the horse's breath steaming in the frigid air. Martha, Rebecca, and Thomas bundled into warm coats and climbed in, tucking thick blankets around themselves. The ride to the ranch was beautiful, the snow transforming the landscape into something pristine and magical. Thomas chattered excitedly, having never experienced a real Christmas celebration before. Martha talked about Christmases past when William was alive. Zachary guided the horses with steady hands and told stories about Pennsylvania winters that made even the harsh Nebraska cold seem mild by comparison. Rebecca sat mostly silent, absorbing the camaraderie, the warmth of shared experience. She felt like an outsider looking in on normal life, wanting desperately to be part of it but not quite sure how. At the ranch, Zachary had clearly prepared for their visit. The house was warm, the fireplace blazing, and delicious smells emanated from the kitchen. He had roasted a chicken, made cornbread dressing, baked biscuits, and even attempted a pie that looked slightly lopsided but smelled wonderful. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted cheerfully, "but I tried my best." They ate at the small table, crowded together but happy, sharing food and conversation. Thomas told stories that made them laugh, and Martha shared memories of Christmases when Rebecca was young, before the darkness had descended. Rebecca listened and felt herself relaxing degree by degree. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, and Zachary produced small gifts for everyone. For Martha, a beautiful set of hair combs he had ordered from Denver. For Thomas, a real pocket knife and a book of adventure stories. For Rebecca, he handed her a carefully wrapped package with an expression that was almost shy. She opened it slowly and found a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a silver pen. "I thought you might like to write," Zachary said. "Stories, thoughts, whatever you want. Sometimes getting things out of your head and onto paper helps." Rebecca ran her fingers over the smooth leather, feeling the quality of the craftsmanship. It was a thoughtful, perfect gift, nothing that required her to change or to be someone she was not. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love it. I am glad." As the afternoon faded into evening, Martha and Thomas fell asleep by the fire, exhausted from the food and the warmth. Rebecca and Zachary sat in the armchairs nearby, talking quietly about everything and nothing. The intimacy of the moment, the soft firelight, the sleeping forms providing a buffer, all combined to make Rebecca feel safer than she had in years. "Can I ask you something?" Zachary said eventually. "Yes. Do you think you will ever be able to let someone touch you?" "I am not asking for me specifically. I am just wondering if you think it is possible someday." Rebecca considered the question seriously. "I do not know. The idea terrifies me. But lately, I have been wondering if maybe, with the right person in the right way, it might be possible." Slowly. Carefully. What would the right way look like? She thought about it. Asking permission. Always asking. Never assuming or taking. Starting small, maybe just a hand on my shoulder or my arm. Being willing to stop the instant I ask. Understanding that some days I might be able to tolerate touch and other days I cannot. She looked at him. "It would require enormous patience." "I am a patient man," Zachary reminded her gently, "and I think you are worth any amount of patience." Something bold rose in Rebecca, a desire to push past her fear to try. "Would you like to try something small if I give permission?" Zachary's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "No, but I want to try anyway." He stood slowly and moved to stand in front of her chair, but several feet away, giving her space to refuse. "May I touch your hand?" he asked, his voice soft. Rebecca's heart hammered. "Yes." Zachary knelt down, bringing himself to her level rather than looming over her, and extended his hand palm up on the arm of her chair, not reaching for her but offering. Rebecca stared at his calloused, work-roughened hand, and the fear rose up like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. But beneath the fear was something else, a tiny spark of wanting, of hope. She lifted her hand slowly, shaking so hard she could barely control it, and placed it in his. His palm was warm, his grip gentle, and he held perfectly still, letting her adjust to the sensation. Rebecca focused on breathing, on the feel of his skin against hers, on the fact that this was her choice, her decision, that she could pull away at any moment. "You are doing so well," Zachary murmured. "So brave." They stayed like that for perhaps 30 seconds before Rebecca's panic overwhelmed her and she yanked her hand back, pressing it to her chest. "I am sorry, I cannot." "You have nothing to apologize for. You did it, Rebecca. You let me touch your hand and the world did not end. That is huge." Rebecca looked at him through tears she had not realized were falling and saw only pride and tenderness in his face. He meant it. He was not disappointed or frustrated. He was genuinely pleased with what she had managed, no matter how small it seemed. "I want to try again," she said. "Not now, but someday. I want to be able to do this without feeling like I am dying. Then we will try again whenever you are ready, and we will keep trying as many times as it takes." Zachary stood and returned to his chair, restoring the physical distance. "You set the pace, Rebecca. Always." As evening deepened into night, Martha and Thomas woke and it was time to return to town. The ride back was quiet, everyone tired but content. When they arrived at the store, Zachary helped unload the sleigh, and as Martha and Thomas went inside, he caught Rebecca's attention. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You set the pace, but I want you to know that I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Zimmerman. Not because I think I can fix you or save you, but because of who you are, strength and fear and courage all tangled together. So when you are ready to try again, to take another step, I will be here." He left before she could respond, and Rebecca stood in the cold watching his sleigh disappear into the darkness, her hand still tingling from where he had held it, his words echoing in her mind. The winter passed slowly, cold weeks blending into months. Rebecca used the journal Zachary had given her, writing her thoughts and fears, trying to process the complicated tangle of emotions he inspired. She wrote about the fear that still gripped her, but also about the small moments of progress, the times she managed to stand a bit closer to customers, or did not flinch quite as hard when someone moved suddenly. Zachary visited the store faithfully, and they developed a routine. He would come in the late afternoon when business was slow, and they would talk for an hour, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing important. Occasionally, Rebecca would ask him to try touching her hand again, and each time became slightly easier, the panic subsiding a bit faster. By February, she could hold his hand for several minutes without feeling like she might shatter. By March, she could let him place his hand on her shoulder briefly. Each achievement felt monumental, a victory over the darkness that had controlled her for so long. One afternoon in early April, when the snow had finally melted and the prairie was beginning to green up, Zachary arrived at the store with a proposal. "I need to ride over to Plum Creek to pick up some equipment I ordered. It is about a day's ride each way. Would you like to come with me? We could take it slow, camp overnight, make a real trip of it." The suggestion was both terrifying and tempting. 2 days alone with Zachary, with only the open prairie and the stars as chaperones. It felt like a test, a chance to see if she was capable of more than brief moments of contact in the safety of familiar places. "I will need to ask Aunt Martha," Rebecca said slowly, "but if she agrees, then yes, I would like that." Martha not only agreed but seemed delighted, insisting Rebecca take time off and enjoy herself. The morning they were to leave, she hugged Rebecca carefully, respecting her boundaries, and whispered, "Be happy, child. You deserve it." They left Fort Kearny at dawn, riding east under a sky turning pink and gold with sunrise. Zachary had packed supplies and camping gear, and he kept the pace easy, letting Rosie amble along beside his horse. They talked and sang old songs and fell into comfortable silences. Rebecca felt something loosening inside her with every mile they traveled, as though the distance from town was also distance from her fear. They reached Plum Creek by evening, and while Zachary collected his equipment from the smith, Rebecca wandered the small town, enjoying her anonymity. No one here knew her as the strange woman who flinched at everything. She was just another traveler passing through. They camped that night beside a creek, the water murmuring over rocks, the fire crackling and sending sparks toward the emerging stars. Zachary made beans and bacon for dinner, and they ate sitting on their bedrolls, close enough to share the fire's warmth but maintaining their careful distance. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said as darkness settled fully around them. "Always. Why have you never married? A man like you, with property and prospects, surely you have had offers." Zachary stirred the fire with a stick, watching the sparks fly up. "I was engaged once back in Pennsylvania before everything fell apart with my father's business. She was the daughter of one of his associates, and I thought we were in love. But when the scandal broke, When my family lost everything, she returned my ring and married someone else within 6 months. It taught me that some people love you for what you have, not who you are. I decided then that I would rather be alone than be with someone who could turn away so easily. And you have been alone since, mostly. There have been a few women over the years, but nothing serious. I think I was waiting. He looked at her across the fire. Waiting for someone who understood that real love is not about perfection or convenience. It is about choosing someone despite the difficulties, because they matter more than the easy path. Rebecca's throat tightened. I am not easy, Zachary. I come with so many difficulties. You are worth every single one of them. He set down the stick. May I come sit beside you? I will not touch you unless you ask, but I would like to be closer. Yes. He moved around the fire and settled on his bedroll a few feet from hers, close enough that she could feel his presence but far enough that she did not feel crowded. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in their thousands, the Milky Way a bright river across the sky. I am afraid, Rebecca whispered. I am afraid that I will never be normal, that I will never be able to give you what you deserve. What I deserve is someone who sees me, who values me, who makes me laugh and think and feel alive. You do all of that, Rebecca. Anything else, we will figure out together. She turned to look at him, this patient, kind man who had waited months for her to feel safe, who had never once pushed or demanded or taken. I am falling in love with you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I think I have been for a while now. Zachary's smile was radiant even in the darkness. That is the best thing I have heard in a very long time, but I do not know if I can ever. She gestured helplessly. Be intimate, in the way married people are. The thought of it makes me want to crawl out of my skin. Then we will not worry about that now. If we ever get married, we will figure out what our intimacy looks like in ways that feel safe for you. And if that means separate beds and no physical relationship beyond holding hands, then that is what it will be. I want you, Rebecca, not some idealized version of what a wife should be. You truly mean that. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. Rebecca felt something break open inside her, all the fear and pain and shame cracking apart to let in light. She was not healed, not completely, might never be completely, but she was healing, and this man loved her anyway, loved her not despite her brokenness but inclusive of it. May I hold your hand? She asked. Yes. She reached across the small space between their bedrolls and laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that under the vast Nebraska sky, two damaged people finding their way toward wholeness together. They returned to Fort Kearny 2 days later, and something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding and commitment. Zachary began courting her properly, calling on her at the store, taking her on rides when the weather permitted, bringing her small gifts and making her laugh with his dry humor. People in town noticed and began to talk, but the gossip was mostly kind, pleased that the strange Zimmerman girl had found someone patient enough for her peculiarities. By summer, Zachary asked Rebecca to marry him properly, down on one knee in the back garden behind the store, a simple gold band in his hand. I love you, he said. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like. Will you marry me? Rebecca wanted to say yes immediately, but she needed him to understand fully what he was agreeing to. I do not know if I will ever be comfortable with physical intimacy. I do not know if we can have children. I do not know if I will ever stop flinching or stop having nightmares. You could have someone so much easier. But I do not want someone easier. I want you, Rebecca, exactly as you are, with all your fear and courage and strength. We will figure out the rest as we go. He held up the ring. So will you? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you." They were married in September of 1879, a small ceremony at the church in Fort Kearny with Martha and Thomas standing witness. Rebecca wore a simple blue dress because the thought of white, with all its implications of purity and wedding nights, felt like too much. Zachary wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony itself was brief, and when the minister said Zachary could kiss his bride, Rebecca tensed. But Zachary simply took her hand, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, and whispered, "We will get there when you are ready." And Rebecca loved him so much in that moment she thought her heart might burst. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, but Zachary had prepared separate bedrooms, making it clear without words that he expected nothing. They sat up late talking by the fireplace, holding hands, and when they finally went to their respective rooms, Rebecca felt not disappointed but grateful, overwhelmed by his understanding. Married life was an adjustment, but a good one. Rebecca moved to the ranch, and together they established routines that honored both their needs. She cooked and kept house, though Zachary often helped, insisting that her taking care of his home was not a duty but a shared effort. He worked the ranch and slowly expanded his herd, building toward a future that would support them comfortably. The question of physical intimacy hung between them, unspoken but present. Rebecca wanted to be able to give Zachary that part of marriage, not out of duty, but because she genuinely wanted to experience that closeness with him. But the fear remained paralyzing. One evening in early October, after they had been married 3 weeks, Rebecca came to Zachary where he sat reading by the fireplace. "Can we talk?" she asked nervously. "Of course." He set aside his book and gave her his full attention. "I want to try," she said in a rush, "to be intimate. Not tonight necessarily, but sometime soon. I want to be a proper wife to you." Zachary frowned. "Rebecca, you are already a proper wife. You do not owe me anything." "I know I do not owe you, but I want to. I love you and I want to share that with you. I am just terrified." He stood and approached her slowly, stopping just within arm's reach. "What would make you feel safest?" Rebecca had been thinking about this, trying to imagine how it could possibly work. "If I could be in control. If you would lie still and let me set the pace, let me touch you first, let me decide how far to go and when to stop. If you would promise that the instant I say stop, you will stop, no matter what. I promise you that absolutely. You control everything, and I will not move unless you ask me to." His expression was utterly serious. "And if you want to try and then change your mind, even in the middle of it, that is completely fine. There is no obligation, no expectation." "When?" Rebecca asked, her heart racing. "Whenever you feel ready. Tonight, tomorrow, next month, you tell me." She took a shaky breath. "Tonight. I want to try tonight while I am feeling brave enough." They went to Zachary's room, the larger of the 2 bedrooms, and he lit a single lamp that cast soft shadows. Rebecca's hands shook as she undressed down to her chemise and drawers, and Zachary did the same, stripping to his union suit. He lay down on the bed, perfectly still, his hands at his sides, and looked at her with such love and patience that Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I am here," he said quietly. "Take all the time you need." Rebecca approached the bed slowly, every instinct screaming at her to flee, but she forced herself forward, climbing up to sit beside him, not touching yet. She studied his face in the lamplight, the crow's feet around his eyes, the laugh lines bracketing his mouth, the kindness that radiated from every feature. This was Zachary, who had never hurt her, who had waited months for her to feel safe, who loved her completely. "May I touch your face?" She whispered. "Yes." She reached out with trembling fingers and traced the line of his jaw, feeling the rasp of evening stubble. He held perfectly still, barely breathing, letting her explore. She touched his cheekbones, his nose, his forehead, learning the geography of his face. When she brushed her thumb across his lips, he closed his eyes but did not move. Emboldened, Rebecca placed her palm flat on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath his skin. The warmth of him, the solidness, began to chip away at her panic. This was not her brother's touch, cruel and violating. This was her husband, her friend, who wanted only what she freely gave. "You are doing so well," Zachary murmured. "So brave." Rebecca continued her exploration, running her hands over his shoulders, his arms, his chest. She was shaking less now, the fear receding as curiosity took its place. She had never touched another person like this, with permission and care, and it felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When she hesitated at the edge of his union suit, Zachary said softly, "You can stop here if you want. We do not have to go further tonight." But Rebecca was tired of fear ruling her life. "I want to try," she said, and began unbuttoning the garment with shaking fingers. Zachary helped her by shrugging out of it, then lay back down, completely vulnerable before her. Rebecca looked at his body and felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Fear, yes, but also tenderness, and desire that startled her with its intensity. He was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with trust. "May I touch you?" she asked. "Anywhere you want," he assured her. She continued her exploration, learning the planes and angles of his body, the places that made his breath catch, the spots where tension gathered. And slowly, incrementally, her own body began to respond, the fear giving way to something warmer, more insistent. "I do not know what to do," she admitted, frustrated by her own ignorance. "You do not have to do anything. Just being here, letting yourself feel safe with me, that is enough." Zachary's voice was strained but patient. "May I touch you? I will go slowly and you can tell me to stop at any moment." Rebecca's immediate instinct was to refuse, but she forced herself to consider it. She wanted this, wanted to be able to experience intimacy without fear. "Yes," she whispered, "but slowly, and only where I say, of course." Zachary sat up carefully, moving at a glacial pace, giving her time to adjust. "May I touch your face?" he asked, and when she nodded, he cupped her cheek with such gentleness it made her want to cry. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, "so strong." He touched her face, her hair, her shoulders, always asking permission before moving to a new area, always ready to stop. When his hand ghosted over her collarbone and the edge of her chemise, Rebecca tensed, the old fear rising. "Stop," she gasped, and Zachary froze immediately, withdrawing his hand. "It is all right," he soothed. "You are safe. I am right here and we do not have to do anything else." Rebecca fought through the panic, breathing deeply, reminding herself that this was Zachary, that she was safe, that she could stop at any time. "I want to keep going," she said when she could speak again. "I just needed a moment. Take all the moments you need." They continued like that, Rebecca pushing her boundaries bit by bit, Zachary responding with infinite patience. When they finally came together, it was awkward and uncertain, nothing like the passionate encounters described in novels. Rebecca cried through most of it, tears streaming down her face as her body warred between fear and desire. But Zachary held her when she asked to be held, stopped when she asked him to stop, and throughout it all, he told her how much he loved her, how proud he was of her courage. Afterward, they lay together in the lamplight, and Rebecca felt something she had never experienced before, safe in another person's arms. "I did it," she whispered, almost disbelieving. "You did," Zachary agreed, kissing her forehead. "You are incredible." It was not perfect, and the next times were not perfect either. Sometimes Rebecca could not go through with it and would flee to her own room, overcome by panic. Sometimes she cried the entire time, but slowly, over months and years, it became easier. Her body learned that touch could be safe, that intimacy could be beautiful, that love did not have to hurt. Their life together settled into comfortable rhythms. Rebecca continued helping Martha at the store a few days each week, enjoying the work and the connection to town. Zachary expanded his ranch steadily, earning a reputation as a fair, honest man. They hosted Thomas for dinner regularly, watching him grow from a frightened boy into a confident young man. 2 years into their marriage, Rebecca realized her monthly courses had not come. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had not been sure children were possible, given her history and the thought of pregnancy, of her body changing and being vulnerable in new ways, brought back old fears. When she told Zachary, he held her carefully and asked, "How do you feel about this?" "Scared," she admitted, "but also happy. I want your children. I just do not know if I can handle what is required to have them." "You are the strongest person I know," Zachary said firmly, "and I will be with you every step of the way. You will not go through this alone." Pregnancy was difficult, not physically but emotionally. Rebecca hated how her body felt out of her control, how other people felt entitled to comment on her condition, and even reach out to touch her growing belly without permission. Zachary ran interference whenever possible, positioning himself as a buffer between Rebecca and the well-meaning but intrusive townspeople. She gave birth in March of 1882 to a healthy baby boy they named Daniel, after Zachary's father. The birth was hard, and Doc Williams had to be stern with Rebecca when panic threatened to overwhelm her. But when they finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, she fell instantly, completely in love. Motherhood was challenging for someone who still struggled with touch, but Rebecca found that caring for her son was different from other physical contact. Daniel needed her, and his needs overrode her fear. She learned to nurse him, to change him, to soothe his cries, and in the process, she healed a bit more. Zachary was a devoted father, waking with Rebecca for nighttime feedings, changing diapers, walking the floor when Daniel was fussy. They parented as a team, and Rebecca watched her husband become even more patient, even kinder if that was possible. 2 years later, Rebecca gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Rebecca's mother. With Sarah's arrival, Rebecca realized she was no longer constantly afraid. She still had difficult days, still flinched occasionally at unexpected touch, still required careful boundaries. But she was no longer defined by her fear. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Thomas, now a young man of 22, began courting a girl from town and eventually asked Zachary's advice about marriage. Martha finally retired from running the store full-time, though she still helped occasionally, and a young couple bought the business from her. Life moved forward in the way it does, seasons turning into years. One evening in the summer of 1887, Rebecca sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching Zachary play with their children in the front yard. Daniel was 5 now, and Sarah was 3, both of them running around their father while he pretended to be a slow-moving bear trying to catch them. Their laughter carried on the warm air, mixing with the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the endless wind moving through the prairie grass. Rebecca thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Kearny 9 years ago, unable to let anyone touch her, convinced she was too broken to ever be whole. That woman felt like someone else now, someone Rebecca barely recognized. She was not completely healed. She suspected she never would be, not fully. The scars her brother had left went too deep, but she had built a good life despite those scars, had found love and family and purpose. Zachary looked up and caught her eye, and his smile was radiant with joy. He said something to the children, who shrieked with laughter and ran off to play by themselves, then climbed the porch steps to sit beside Rebecca. He did not take her hand immediately but waited for her to offer it, as he always did, respecting boundaries even after years of marriage. Rebecca laced her fingers through his and squeezed gently. "I was just thinking about when we met. And I am grateful I got on that stagecoach. I am grateful for my aunt's invitation for this town, for you being patient enough to wait for me." "I would have waited forever if necessary," Zachary said seriously. "You were worth every moment." "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Marrying someone so complicated, you could have had an easier life." "I could have had a different life," Zachary corrected. "Not an easier one or a better one. What we have, what we built together, this is exactly what I wanted." He looked out at their children, at the ranch stretching toward the horizon. "This is everything." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had taken her 2 years of marriage to manage comfortably, and that still felt like a small miracle. "I love you. I love you too. Always." They sat together in the fading light, watching their children play, and Rebecca felt a peace she had never thought possible. She had been so broken, so certain she could never let anyone close. But Zachary had proven her wrong with his patience and his kindness and his willingness to wait for her permission. "I am not afraid anymore," she said softly. Zachary turned to look at her with surprise. "Not at all. Well, sometimes I am still afraid. Old habits die hard. But I am not afraid of you, not afraid of our life together. You made me safe, Zachary. You gave me back something my brother stole. I can never repay that. You do not need to repay it. Loving you, being loved by you, that is more than enough." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You did the hard work of healing. I just held the space for it to happen." Daniel came running up to the porch, his face flushed and happy. "Papa, can you push me on the swing?" "Of course, son." Zachary stood and ruffled his boy's hair, then headed toward the old tree where they had hung a rope swing. Sarah climbed onto the porch and into Rebecca's lap, something that had taken Rebecca months to be comfortable with, but that now felt natural. Her daughter smelled of sunshine and grass, and Rebecca held her close, marveling at how something as simple as hugging her child could feel so profound. "Mama, tell me a story," Sarah demanded. "What kind of story?" "A princess story." Rebecca smiled and began spinning a tale about a princess who lived in a tall tower, not because she was locked there, but because she was afraid to come down. But then a kind prince came along, and instead of trying to rescue her, he simply visited her every day, talking with her, being her friend until one day, she was brave enough to come down on her own. And they lived happily ever after, not because the prince saved her, but because he gave her the space and time to save herself. Sarah listened with wide eyes, and when the story ended, she said seriously, "That is like you and Papa." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "Papa told me once that you were scared when you first came here, but he waited for you to be brave. That is like the princess and the prince." Out of the mouths of children, Rebecca thought, "Yes, sweetness, that is like me and your papa." "I am glad you were brave, Mama. Me too, baby, me too." The years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by harvests and holidays, by the small dramas of family life. Daniel grew tall and serious like his father, while Sarah remained spirited and affectionate. They added a third child in 1889, another boy named William after Martha's late husband, and their family felt complete. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1890, and Rebecca grieved the loss of the aunt who had given her refuge when she needed it most. But she took comfort in knowing that Martha had lived to see her happy and settled, had held all 3 of her great nieces and nephews. Thomas married his sweetheart and opened a carpentry business in town, building furniture and doing repairs. He remained close to Rebecca and Zachary, considering them more family than his distant blood relations. When his first child was born, he and his wife asked Rebecca and Zachary to be godparents, an honor they accepted with joy. The town of Fort Kearny continued to grow and prosper, though it never became the major hub some had predicted. It remained a modest community where people knew their neighbors and looked out for one another. Rebecca became respected in town, not despite her quirks, but because of her kindness and her willingness to help others. Women who had been hurt came to her sometimes, seeking advice or just someone who understood, and Rebecca shared what she had learned about healing. The ranch became successful enough to hire help, though Zachary still worked alongside his hands, never asking anyone to do what he would not do himself. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with a big kitchen where Rebecca could cook, and a library where Zachary's ever-expanding book collection could be properly housed. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Zachary took Rebecca back to the spot where they had camped on their trip to Plum Creek, the place where she had first told him she was falling in love with him. They left the children with Thomas and his wife for the night and rode out under a bright September sky. They made camp as they had before, though now the movements were practiced and easy, years of partnership making them efficient. After dinner, they sat by the fire watching the stars emerge, and Rebecca felt a wave of contentment so powerful it was almost overwhelming. "You remember the first time we sat here?" she asked. "I remember every moment with you," Zachary said. "But yes, I especially remember that night. You were so scared, but you told me you were falling in love with me anyway. It was the bravest thing I had ever witnessed." "I was terrified," Rebecca admitted. "Terrified that I would never be enough, that I was too damaged to make you happy. And now I know that being enough has nothing to do with being perfect. It is about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." Zachary reached for her hand, and she gave it freely. No hesitation, no fear. "You have taught me more about strength and courage than anyone else ever could. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for waiting for my permission," Rebecca said, the words echoing her thoughts from so many years ago. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not a problem to be solved. Thank you for loving me exactly as I was and giving me space to become who I am now." They made love under the stars that night, and it was tender and passionate and completely free of fear. Rebecca could not have imagined, 10 years ago, that this would be possible, that she could experience intimacy without panic, that her body could be a source of joy instead of shame. But Zachary's patience and love had made it real. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Rebecca said, "I want to do something." "What is that?" "I want to find other women like I was, women who have been hurt and do not know how to heal. I want to help them if I can. Maybe start a group that meets in town, somewhere safe where they can talk and be understood." Zachary propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "That is a wonderful idea. How can I help?" They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, and when they finally slept, it was with the peace of people who had found their purpose. Rebecca did start her group, meeting twice a month in the back room of the church. It started with just 3 women, and grew over time as word spread that here was a place where you could talk about your pain without judgment, where you could heal at your own pace. Some of the women went on to marry and have families. Others chose to remain alone, finding fulfillment in work or friendship instead. Rebecca supported them all, understanding that healing looked different for everyone. The century turned, bringing new technologies and changes to the world. Fort Kearny got a telephone line, and eventually electricity came to some of the buildings in town. The ranch added a windmill for water and purchased their first automobile, though Zachary never quite trusted it the way he trusted horses. Their children grew into adults with dreams of their own. Daniel went to college in Lincoln and came back with a degree in agriculture, implementing new techniques on the ranch. Sarah became a teacher, passionate about education and particularly dedicated to helping children who struggled. William showed a talent for music and spent a year studying in Omaha before returning home to teach piano lessons. Rebecca and Zachary became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading and branching. The ranch that Zachary had built alone grew into a legacy shared by multiple generations. One evening in 1920, when Rebecca was 62 and Zachary was 65, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Their hair was gray now, their hands marked with age spots and the scars of decades of work, but they still held hands the way they had for over 30 years. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not come to Fort Kearny?" Zachary asked. Rebecca considered the question. "Sometimes, I think I would have found a way to survive, but I do not think I would have truly lived. You gave me that, the chance to not just survive, but to thrive." "We gave each other that," Zachary corrected. "You taught me what real love looks like, how it requires patience and sacrifice and showing up every day even when it is hard. I was so broken when I met you. You were wounded, not broken. There is a difference." Zachary squeezed her hand gently. "Broken things cannot heal, but wounded things can, given time and care. You proved that every single day." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I love you, Zachary Prescott. I love the life we built together. I love our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I love that you never gave up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself. I could never give up on you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed the top of her head. "Whatever time we have left, I want to spend every moment of it with you." "That is a deal I can accept." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful from pain and patience and love. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sounds of cattle and children and the endless, timeless rhythms of life continuing. Rebecca Prescott was no longer afraid. She had faced her demons and won, not through fighting but through the slow, steady work of healing. She had learned that love did not have to hurt, that touch could be gentle, that she was worthy of care and respect. And it all started because a kind cowboy had said, "Then I will wait for your permission," and meant it with every fiber of his being. As the last light faded from the sky, Rebecca closed her eyes and smiled, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she was safe, and that she had lived a life worth living.